The wedding reception shimmered like a carefully staged performance, chandeliers dripping light across a ballroom filled with polished smiles and brittle laughter. Beneath the gilded surface, however, everyone knew the truth: this was no ordinary union. The Carters and the Hayes had been enemies for decades, their rivalry etched deep into business, politics, and personal vendettas. Yet tonight, for appearance's sake, they dressed in silk and tuxedos, toasting with crystal glasses while pretending that the air wasn't thick with hostility. Lena Carter, at just 24, sat among her relatives, her hands folded neatly on her lap as though her posture alone could keep the evening from unraveling. A law student with dreams far beyond family feuds, she had mastered the art of being invisible in these gatherings, silent, dutiful, watchful. But inside, she carried a different fire, one that longed for independence and the freedom to define her own future. The chatter around her buzzed with undertones of rivalry, every laugh edged with something sharp, every compliment carrying a subtle barb. Lena's eyes swept the room, her chest tight, as though she were watching a fragile mask about to crack. It was in that tense haze that Lena's gaze unexpectedly caught Daniel Hayes's across the room. His expression was unreadable, a careful mix of confidence and defiance, but the spark in his eyes startled her. For a heartbeat too long, neither looked away. The air between them seemed to shift, crackling with something both dangerous and magnetic. Lena quickly dropped her eyes, cheeks warming, but the damage was done, the connection had been made. Moments later, her father rose to make a toast, his voice steady but laced with poison. With a smirk, he delivered a bitter jab at the Hayes family's integrity, a barb designed to wound beneath the surface of civility. Whispers rippled through the tables like a slow-moving fire. Daniel stood, his jaw tight, and responded with sharp words in defense of his family, cutting through the room's polished veneer. Gasps followed. Lena's heart pounded as she watched, torn between loyalty to her father and a startling, almost forbidden sympathy for Daniel. The hostility wasn't new, but for the first time, Lena felt it pressing directly against her own chest, forcing her into a silent conflict she hadn't chosen but could no longer ignore. Later, needing escape, Lena slipped out into the cool night air, her breath fogging slightly under the glow of the street lamps. The muffled sounds of the reception still floated through the walls, but here the tension was softer, almost bearable. She leaned against the stone railing, closing her eyes, only to hear footsteps behind her. When she turned, Daniel stood there, hands in his pockets, his dark suit catching the dim light. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them felt thick, filled with everything their families had said and everything left unsaid. Finally, Lena broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not supposed to even talk, are we?" It was more confession than question, the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. Daniel's lips curved into a wry, dangerous smile, his eyes never leaving hers. "That never stopped me before," he replied, his words carrying both defiance and invitation. The moment felt suspended in time, charged with possibility and risk. Lena's pulse raced, caught between fear of discovery and a thrill she couldn't explain. She knew she should step back, retreat into safety, but for the first time in years, she didn't want to. Lena Carter grew up in a home where love was often mistaken for control and perfection was demanded at every turn. Her father, Charles Carter, one of the city's most powerful attorneys, measured worth not in kindness or character, but in reputation and achievement. To him, Lena was not just a daughter, she was an extension of his legacy, a piece of his carefully constructed empire that needed to reflect nothing but excellence. Every choice she made, from the schools she attended to the people she associated with, was scrutinized. Her mother, though elegant and admired in public, offered little warmth at home. She reinforced Charles's expectations with a cold precision, reminding Lena that appearances mattered above all else. 4 years, Lena played her part flawlessly, the quiet, intelligent daughter who never caused scandal, the one who looked perfect in family photographs. Yet beneath that polished exterior, she felt suffocated, as though her entire life had been scripted without her consent. The law was her father's dream for her, not hers, yet she clung to her legal studies as a secret form of rebellion, telling herself that if she could pass her bar exams and secure her independence, she could finally step out of the Carter shadow. What her family didn't know was that every late-night study session was not only preparation for a career but also her lifeline, her only way to carve out an identity that truly belonged to her. Across the battlefield of rivalry, Daniel Hayes lived a life that appeared charmed to outsiders, wealth, power, and influence wrapped in the Hayes family name. His father ruled the family's vast construction empire with iron authority, demanding loyalty and sacrifice from everyone under his roof. For Daniel, that meant being molded into a successor who valued dominance over compassion, numbers over people. Yet Daniel was not built for such rigidity. His mother, a woman whose warmth seemed constantly dimmed by the need to keep peace in a fractured household, became his quiet refuge. She saw the cracks beneath his confident smile, the way he carried scars invisible to others. Outwardly, Daniel projected rebellion. He played the part of the charming heir who didn't care about rules, who laughed off tension with arrogance and wit. But behind that mask lay years of mistrust, forged by watching his father's ruthless dealings and the never-ending feud with the Carters. Unknown to many, Daniel quietly funneled his energy into humanitarian work, volunteering under different names, funding causes that aligned with his heart rather than his father's ambitions. It was his way of fighting back, of carving out an identity untouched by the venomous rivalry that defined his family's name. Yet no matter how far he tried to distance himself from the toxic cycles around him, Daniel could never truly escape. The Hayes name followed him like a shadow, reminding him of the weight he carried, and of the battle between who he was expected to be and who he longed to become. The bitterness between the Carters and the Hayes was not just rumor or posturing, it was war dressed in civility. Years ago, what began as a promising business partnership had crumbled into betrayal. The Carters, with Charles at the helm, claimed the Hayes had violated a contract, leading to lawsuits and very public humiliation. The Hayes retaliated with accusations of manipulation and deceit, and what could have been resolved privately became a scandal splashed across newspapers, courtrooms, and boardrooms. Both families emerged scarred, pride shredded, reputations marred. Instead of healing, they clung to their rage, vowing never to forgive. For Lena and Daniel, this feud was an inheritance neither had chosen yet both were forced to carry. It shaped their worlds like invisible shackles, dictating who they could trust, love, or even speak to. But beneath the weight of this legacy, something else stirred. Lena, in her quiet rebellion, studied for her law exams in secret, each page of her notes a step toward into something neither family would ever forgive. The first secret meeting was almost accidental, a brief exchange at a quiet cafe far from their family's watchful eyes. But once a line had been crossed, there was no turning back. Lena and Daniel began carving out slivers of time where the world couldn't touch them, coffee shops tucked in side streets, late-night walks under the anonymity of city lights, stolen moments where the only danger greater than being caught was the growing intensity of their feelings. Each meeting was charged, their conversations swinging between laughter, confessions, and the unspoken awareness that discovery would shatter everything. But the facade of normalcy began to crack. Charles Carter, sharp-eyed and relentless, noticed Lena's increasing late nights and asked pointed questions that left her fumbling for excuses. Meanwhile, Daniel's brother noticed the glow of his phone late at night, catching him mid-text. Though he didn't know the recipient, suspicion lingered. For both Lena and Daniel, the walls of secrecy were closing in, and every step deeper into their bond risked exposure. Lena soon found herself tangled in lies that cut deeper than she expected. To protect her secret, she told her best friend she was buried in exam prep, dodging questions about her whereabouts. But every excuse built another wall between them, leaving Lena with an ache of guilt for betraying the one person who had always been her confidant. Daniel, meanwhile, began missing family obligations, dinners, business meetings, offering half-hearted excuses that only fueled his father's anger. The pressure mounted on both sides, their double lives demanding sacrifices that left them frayed and restless. At night, Lena lay awake wrestling with the question that haunted her: did love make her selfish? Was she risking everything, not just her own future, but her family's trust, for a feeling that might destroy them all? Daniel, too, battled ghosts of his past. He remembered stories of his father's own forbidden love, a relationship crushed under the same weight of family expectations. That memory became both a warning and a wound. Was he doomed to repeat his father's mistakes, or could he break free of the cycle? Their internal struggles made each meeting more intense, each touch more desperate, as though they were fighting time itself. The breaking point came at a Carter family dinner, a formal gathering designed to showcase strength and unity. The table was lined with crystal and silver, every seat filled by relatives who spoke in calculated tones about alliances, wealth, and reputation. Lena tried to remain composed, pushing food around her plate, when her father cleared his throat. With a prideful smile, Charles announced what he framed as a triumph. He had secured an arranged marriage alliance for Lena with the son of another influential family. The words struck her like ice water. Around her, the table erupted in congratulations, her mother nodding with cool approval. But Lena sat frozen, her fork trembling in her hand. She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, Daniel's face flashing in her mind. The weight of the room pressed down on her, every eye expecting gratitude, obedience. Yet beneath her carefully schooled expression, panic and rage boiled. This was no longer about late-night lies or hidden texts, it was her life being bartered, her freedom slipping away under the guise of duty. She wanted to scream, to break free, to shout the truth about the man she already loved. Instead, she forced herself to sit still, her silence louder than any protest. For the first time, Lena understood, if she didn't fight back, her father's decision would erase everything she had found with Daniel before it even had a chance to survive. The secret unraveled not with whispers, but with an eruption. Lena's brother, suspicious of her late-night absences, decided to follow her one evening. Hidden in the shadows, he watched as she slipped into a quiet cafe, only to see Daniel waiting at a corner table. Their laughter, their closeness, the way her hand brushed against Daniel's, it was all the evidence he needed. Betrayal burned in his chest, not just toward Lena but toward the Carter name. He held his silence until the next Carter family gathering, where relatives and business allies filled the grand dining room. Midway through dinner, with a smirk sharpened by self-righteousness, he revealed what he had witnessed. The room fell silent, every eye turning toward Lena. Her father's face twisted with rage, his voice booming as he called her a disgrace, shaming her for bringing dishonor to the Carter name. Across town, word reached the Hayes household, where Daniel's father spat accusations of manipulation, branding Lena as nothing more than a Carter ploy. The feud reignited like dry timber meeting flame, and within hours, the old rivalry spilled into a new public war. The young lovers were no longer just a secret, they were the spark that threatened to burn everything down. The fallout was merciless. Lena was locked down in her family's home, her phone confiscated, every move monitored. Charles Carter declared that his daughter would not destroy the family's reputation any further. Across the divide, Daniel faced his own punishment. His father threatened to cut him off, to disinherit him from the empire he was expected to inherit. Yet defiance ran deep in Daniel's veins. One stormy night, he broke into Lena's apartment, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Come with me," he pleaded, voice trembling with urgency. "We can leave all of this behind." The words filled her with both hope and terror. Before she could answer, a different truth began to surface. Whispers and fragments of old family stories collided, leading Lena to uncover a revelation buried beneath years of lies. The feud had not started simply with a broken deal. It had begun with an affair, her father's affair with Daniel's aunt. A betrayal that turned business rivalry into a deeply personal vendetta. The discovery shattered everything Lena thought she knew. Her love for Daniel was not just forbidden by rivalry, it was tangled in her father's shameful past, a history deliberately hidden from her. Fueled by rage and desperation, Lena confronted her father in his study, the heavy oak door closing behind her like a gavel sealing fate. The air was thick with cigar smoke, the desk stacked with files that represented power and control. She demanded the truth, her voice breaking as she pressed him for answers. Charles, stone-faced at first, finally allowed the mask to slip. With cold precision, he admitted it. Years ago, he had betrayed their family with Daniel's aunt, igniting the feud when pride and vengeance consumed both sides. His eyes, devoid of regret, hardened as he delivered the final blow. In that moment, she saw her father not as a protector but as the architect of her cage, a man who had destroyed not only his own life but hers. Tears burned in her eyes, but beneath the grief, something else sparked resolve. If her father's sins had written the first chapter of this war, she would not let them dictate her ending. For the first time, Lena understood that the choice was no longer about defiance or obedience, it was about survival, freedom, and the right to love on her own terms. The confrontation with her father left Lena shattered, but within that devastation, a spark of clarity ignited. 4 years, she had lived as though her life belonged to the Carter name, every choice shaped by duty and fear. But now, standing in the ruins of truth, she understood that her father's control was nothing more than chains forged from his own mistakes. One morning, she walked into his study with her suitcase already packed. The room felt smaller than it ever had, his presence less commanding than before. "I'm done living for your legacy," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Charles looked up, incredulous, his fury simmering just beneath the surface, but she didn't flinch. "I will not marry to repair your pride. I will not sacrifice myself for a name that was built on lies." For the first time, Lena's defiance wasn't hidden in secrecy or whispered rebellion, it was a declaration. She left the house with nothing but her books and the fragile freedom she had claimed, her heart heavy but unshackled. The fear of her father's wrath lingered, but it no longer held her captive. On the other side of the feud, Daniel faced his own reckoning. His father's threats had grown sharper, the promise of disinheritance now an ultimatum. But Daniel no longer cared about titles or wealth. For too long, he had played the role of dutiful son, choking down his own dreams beneath the Hayes Empire's weight. In a tense confrontation that ended with slammed doors and silence heavy enough to suffocate, Daniel declared his departure. "I'd rather have nothing than become the man you are," he told his father, his voice hard with finality. His mother's tearful gaze followed him as he walked out, carrying only a few belongings and the certainty that he had chosen his own path at last. Without the Empire's protection, the road ahead was uncertain, but it was honest. Daniel began working at a non-profit he had quietly supported for years, dedicating himself to causes that had always mattered more to him than profits or power. For the first time, he woke each morning without dread, his reflection in the mirror no longer a stranger. Freedom came at a cost, but it tasted sweeter than any inheritance ever could. Despite their courage, Lena and Daniel knew that love couldn't immediately erase the scars carved by generations of hate. They met one last time, not in secret but with the weight of honesty pressing between them. Sitting on a park bench beneath a canopy of autumn leaves, their hands brushed, lingering as if trying to memorize the feel of one another. They spoke quietly, acknowledging that while their love was real, healing required distance. "We need to find ourselves before we can find each other," Lena whispered, her eyes glistening. Daniel nodded, his heart aching but resolute. And so they parted, not as enemies, not as victims, but as two people choosing growth over destruction. Lena poured her pain and determination into her studies, finishing her law exams and passing with distinction, her name announced with respect that belonged to her alone, not her father. Daniel, meanwhile, embraced his work at the non-profit, finding fulfillment in rebuilding homes, communities, and piece by piece himself. Their paths no longer bent under the weight of family feuds but stretched toward horizons they chose for themselves. Though apart, they carried the knowledge that love had given them the courage to break free. And in that freedom, both found empowerment not in legacy, not in wealth, but in the unshakable strength of finally living authentically. Months had passed since Lena had walked away from her family's grip, but the echoes of those battles still lingered in her chest. Her apartment was small, far from the lavish halls she once called home, but it was hers, every book stacked neatly on her desk, every note scribbled in the margins of her study guides a reflection of her own will. That night, she sat hunched over her papers, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the exhaustion etched on her face. The world outside was quiet, save for the hum of traffic and the faint sound of life continuing beyond her window. She had become accustomed to solitude, to finding strength not in approval but in persistence. As she set down her pen, a letter resting at the corner of her desk caught her eye. She opened it carefully, heart thrumming, and read the words she had dreamed of for years. She had been accepted into a prestigious law fellowship. For a moment, Lena sat frozen, the weight of the letter in her hands grounding her. Then, slowly, her lips curved into a trembling smile. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was proof that she had built something entirely her own, without the shadow of her family defining her path. The fellowship acceptance was a victory, But Lena knew her true closure required more than professional achievement, it demanded release. On her nightstand sat the family heirloom ring her father had once pressed into her hand, a cold symbol of the arranged marriage he had tried to force upon her. For months, she had left it untouched, as though its presence mocked her independence. That evening, she picked it up, holding the weight of generations in her palm. The gold felt heavy, but no longer binding. With deliberate care, she placed the ring into a small velvet box. She sealed it, addressed it to her family estate, and slipped it into a mailing envelope. Her hands didn't shake this time, her decision was firm. By returning the ring, she wasn't just rejecting the marriage, it was a declaration that her life was hers alone. Dropping the package into the postbox the next morning, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't vengeance she felt, nor bitterness, just release. Her father could keep the symbols of legacy, she no longer needed them. She was building her own. That same evening, as Lena returned to her apartment, she found another envelope waiting at her door. The handwriting was unmistakable, Daniel's. Her chest tightened as she tore it open, eyes scanning the simple yet profound words, "No war. No families. Just us, someday." Her breath caught, a mixture of longing and relief flooding her. He wasn't asking for now. He wasn't pressuring her to choose. Instead, his note was a promise, a seed of hope for a future untethered by old wounds. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the words again, clutching the letter to her chest. She moved toward the window, where the city skyline stretched across the horizon, alive with light. It was a view she had once only dreamed of, possibility shining just beyond her reach. Now, it was hers. She whispered into the night, her voice soft but certain, "Someday." The word carried both ache and promise, a vow to herself as much as to him. The skyline glowed behind her, not as a backdrop to someone else's story but as a canvas for her own. Lena smiled through her tears, the first true smile of freedom she had ever known.